saí de lá para fora bem obrigado, que eu gostava muito de estar nas ilhas. Mas nós éramos 9 irmãos. Meu pai morreu, eu tinha 11 anos.
In the early 15th century, the first Europeans set foot in California. It was Portuguese. 3 centuries later, immigrants faced the oceans for months, looking for a better life in this new world. These are their stories. It was to a Portuguese that the very heart of California, along Drake's Bay, owed its first European occupation and incorporation in the civilized world. Under Cabrillo's command, the small fleet set sail northward from modern-day Mexico, and on September 28, 1542, arrived at a bay he named San Miguel. Years later, the place name was changed to San Diego. I, Cabrillo, take possession of this land, these waters, and this harbor. The 17th century Portuguese writer, Antonio Vieira, wrote, God gave the Portuguese a small country as a cradle, but all the world as their grave. All Portuguese and Spanish possessions, which included California, were under one king for 60 years. 19th century life in the Azores was the product of over 300 years of struggling to make a living from the soil in an isolated environment. Whenever life in the islands became impossible, people left. Overpopulation, economic crises, and the lack of outside involvement in the archipelago have all provoked emigration. The first settlers were a mixed group of people from the Portuguese provinces of Algarve and Minho, Madeireans, Moorish prisoners, black slaves, French, Italians, Scots, English and Flemings were among the early settlers. There were criminals, Spanish clergy, Jews, soldiers, government officials, European merchants and sugarcane growers. Because of the isolated nature of the islands and the harshness of the land and at times climate, all settlers had to work together to survive.
Nossa casa não havia água corrente, não havia luz elétrica, era um candeeiro a petróleo, íamos buscar a água, era um chafariz, um poço que havia lá, de maneira que a alimentação era muito... Ainda passávamos fome, mas passávamos dificuldades, porque comíamos basicamente era sopas e quando se matava o porco, ou quando passava um carro lá e matava uma galinha, as galinhas davam para rolas.
O pãezinho ainda faltava, mas lá outras coisas não havia porque não se podia.
Era trabalhar de noite, de começar da manhã, mesmo crianças que a gente saía da escola, tinha que ir trabalhar, ajudar o meu pai, tinha que ser assim. Foi uma vida dura, posso dizer assim, uma vida difícil.
On Tuesday, June 27, 1542, with sails spread in a favorable wind, the San Salvador and the Victoria set out from the west coast of Mexico. The fleet continued along the coast until September 28, 1542, when the expedition sighted a very good harbor, which Cabrillo named San Miguel. He was the first white man to sight what would later be renamed San Diego Bay.
Baleia, baleia, grita vigia, o alto da aldeia, baleia.
The Azoreans first came to the United States in large numbers as members of whaling crews. They began with shore whaling in the channel between the islands of San Jorge and Pico. Whaling crews were always needed, and they could be found at the Azores. Yankee captains would disembark from New England and head for the Azores or the Cape Verde Islands, looking for sailors. They liked the Portuguese. They were hard-working, quiet, and cheap. Starting in 1857, San Diego played a highly important role in whale hunting. The industry peaked in 1871, but the whaling industry was running out of whales. Shortly it would be replaced by the petroleum industry. Many Portuguese earned their way to the east coast of the United States, to Hawaii or to California, by shipping out as a deckhand aboard these early whaling ships. The whaling ship was the early highway to the New World.
When my grandparents on my mother's side of the family got off the train station in Hanford, California in 1904, with just a couple of shamalas, little in their wildest dreams, I'm sure, would they think that 100 years later, their grandson would be running for the United States Congress and being successful and being elected.
In 1945, Portugal had an extensive colonial empire. The new regime was authoritarian, and the young Portuguese man went to war to control many colonies in Africa. After the Carnation Revolution, in April 25, 1974, a new wave of Portuguese came to America, determined to succeed.
Eu lembro-me de primo do meu pai ir lá, que estava para a América há 30 e tal anos. Fui visitá-lo, quando vivia lá no farol da Piedade, lá no Pico, e aqui fazia uma confusão como é que era uma pessoa que estava fora da sua terra 30 e tal anos, sem voltar. E aqui estou eu, 45 anos.
Nos quintais já não há vida, não há porco a criar, já não há roupa estendida, nem galinhas para tratar. Falta o eco das trindades, no vazio das tardes frias. Restam agora saudades, recordações desses dias. Mudam os tempos e as vontades, mudam os ventos, pensamentos e vaidades.
Coming to a strange country from so far away and really leaving everything behind, it's tough, and really understanding what they've had to go through, I think really makes you appreciate it more and more as time goes on.
Ninguém veio pela aventura de imigração. E ainda não falei com uma pessoa que chegasse à América e disse: vim pela aventura, porque ainda estava muito aborrecido, não tinha nada a fazer. Estava mesmo. E então vim na aventura da imigração. A imigração é um drama importantíssimo e um drama que dói na família.
É incrível a força da imigração dos portugueses. Parece que já estão habituados, é de raiz. Os descobrimentos, por vezes, sempre foram conquistadores do mundo inteiro. E parece que já temos isso no sangue. Vamos para qualquer parte do mundo. É os açorianos para a costa leste, para a Califórnia, para o Canadá. É os madeirenses para a África do Sul, para a Austrália, para a Venezuela. É os continentais para a Suíça, para a Inglaterra. Nós já estamos habituados a isso. Um país tão pequenino, com 10 milhões de habitantes neste momento, mas espalhados por todo o mundo. Somos conquistadores. Já éramos há 500 anos e continuamos a ser, através da imigração. Nós somos todos cabritos.
Hardship builds character. This is seen time and time again throughout history, and this applies to the Azoreans. They had to survive earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, fierce storms, crop disease, European wars, and pirate raids, to name their greatest challenges. Because of their isolation in the middle of the Atlantic, they became self-reliant, independent, and harmonious to survive. Portugal as a whole, which includes the Azores from 1864 to 1973, had over 2 million immigrants. Next to Ireland, Portugal had the largest number of immigrants during that period of time per capita. Of the 2 million immigrants, 160,000 went to the United States and were almost exclusively Azoreans. It has been said Portugal's principal export is its people. There were essentially three waves: 1820 to 1870, 1870 to 1930, and 1960 to the present. A total of 436,837 Portuguese came to America. It is safe to assume that at least 80%, if not higher, were from the Azores. About half came to California to work in whaling, fishing, agriculture, and gold mining. The latest wave of mass Portuguese migration began in 1958 after the first Azorean Refugee Act, sponsored by Senators John Kennedy of Massachusetts and John Pastore of Rhode Island. Numerous refugees from Capilinos volcanic eruptions came to America. Many of these immigrants from the Azores set down roots in California.
A migração que está aqui do Pico Fluvial é resultado do pós-Capelinhos e depois o Azorean, não só o Azorean Refugee Act, mas também a chamada Family Reunification Act do John F. Kennedy, ou seja, o que a gente chama em português, e eu gosto muito mais do termo em português, a carta de chamada.
The symbolism of the immigrant can be seen in the heroic 12-ton statue of pure white Portuguese marble in the city of San Leandro, dedicated in 1964. It was on August 6, 1868, that a small group of Portuguese immigrants gathered in the city by the Golden Gate to found the Portuguese Benevolent Association of the city and county of San Francisco.
Initially, we were a source for those immigrants coming from Portugal and from the Azores and from other areas who spoke the Portuguese language to get together, to socialize, to share their stories and share their successes and defeats.
In the early days, the ladies of the colony suspected the men were meeting to practice masonry rituals. In 1901, in the 15th Annual Convention, a resolution was passed to invite King of Portugal, Carlos, to become honorary president of the Supreme Council. 3 years later, the king accepted. By 1928, the UPEC had expanded to over 25,000 members, including some non-Portuguese. 395 members of the society served actively in the armed forces of the United States during the period of 1940 to the end of the war. In both World War I and II alone, these societies brought over $5 million worth of defense bonds and stamps. Perhaps the greatest role as reminders of Portuguese heritage and culture among the descendants of the early immigrants.
You look back to, people that have won Congressional Medal of Honors, gentlemen who were one of the first to die in World War II. The fact that in World War II, actually, those Portuguese farmers and dairy workers were not asked to join. They actually enlisted themselves to go and fight for this country. They didn't have to, but they chose to.
Portuguese Californian immigrants have played a significant role in American politics. In 1900, John G. Matos from Fayal was the first Portuguese in California to be elected to a state-level political position. This would be something impossible under Salazar and the Azores. Decades later, E.H. Christian and Antone A. Rogers were also elected. In 1967, Joseph Gonzalez was joined in the assembly by a man that made history. His name was John Vasconcelos. He served 38 consecutive years. Neither Portuguese or non-Portuguese legislators ever achieved this in the history of the state. Tony Coelho, a third-generation descendant from the island of Terceira, was the first Portuguese Californian at the national level. He was followed by many others. By 1960, Senator Henry Mello, with roots in South George and Terceira Island, had become chairman of the Democratic Central Committee on the John F. Kennedy campaign. By the year 2000, 5 Portuguese Americans were serving at the national level.
The beginning in the 60s and in the 70s and the 80s and 90s, had as many as 4 to 6 members of the legislature of Portuguese ancestry. And in Washington, D.C., of course, first beginning with Congressman Tony Coelho in the late 1970s, but also as recently as the last 10 years, we've had 4 members of Congress of Portuguese ancestry.
Quem é que sabe em Portugal que há congressistas federais no Congresso Federal norte-americano de origem portuguesa e que vêm aqui exatamente da Califórnia? Todos eles, aliás.
Nós não podemos passar ao lado que aqui na Califórnia temos mais de 500 mil de luso-descendentes. Isto é importante demais para que Portugal passe ao lado desta grande realidade dos nossos portugueses além fronteiras.
The Portuguese communities around here, especially Azorean communities, have been in California for a long time, and they're part of the real history of California. And I'm one of the products of this Azorean culture that has kind of its own culture here in California that's developed with the different festas and Holy Ghost festivals. There's been a few Azoreans, Americans that have been elected to Congress, and there's never been anybody from Portugal or whose family's from Portugal. Almost all of them are from the Azores, or families are from the Azores. And oftentimes what you find in this country and really around the globe is that nobody even knows where or what the Azores are.
In Portuguese, I never would see that as a handicap. I'd see it as a benefit. Being bilingual or even trilingual, where I pick up a little bit of Spanish and able to speak to others in the community, I think that actually helped me quite a bit. But it played out very well for me, just my background and who I am, and it helped to build me to the person I am today. So I see it as a huge benefit, and I'm a lucky person to be born where I was born, when I was born.
The United States is a country of immigrants, fundamentally, and I think it's terribly important that one maintains the contact, the link between the diaspora, people that are now American citizens, but very proud of their origins, and the countries they come from. And most of these immigrants come from Europe.
Califórnia é cerca de 4,5 vezes o tamanho de Portugal. Portanto, em si já é revelador da dimensão do Estado. E a nossa comunidade não está só num sítio. É gigantesco o Estado, as distâncias são muito grandes.
Concentra uma das maiores, se não mesmo a maior, comunidade entre luso-americanos e portugueses existente neste país.
A Califórnia é o estado mais populoso dos Estados Unidos, que é a 9ª economia do mundo, é uma região com um elevado espírito empreendedor e inovador, e é de muito interesse para Portugal conseguir reforçar as suas relações de comércio e de investimento com esta região dos Estados Unidos.
Na Califórnia verifica-se talvez de forma mais nítida uma integração nas comunidades de acolhimento, talvez fruto da distância. O facto é que, desde logo a nível político, ainda hoje temos vários congressistas federais e estaduais na Califórnia que são açorianos ou descendentes de açorianos. E dessa forma isso é bem sintomático da forma como se processou essa integração no plano político, no plano económico, com empresários bem-sucedidos em diversas áreas da economia, e também na forma como, ao nível da educação, da ciência, do saber, essa comunidade, a nossa comunidade na Califórnia, se foi afirmando. E este potencial que representa para os Açores esta grande massa de gente que se sente ainda ligada, apesar do passar dos anos, que se sente ainda ligada a estes 9 bocadinhos de terra aqui no meio do Atlântico, acaba por ser também de grande importância para a própria região autónoma dos Açores.
It's something that you got. It's extra. You're proud and you're great to be an American. But to go to my home where I was born in Portugal is more than it just is what it does.
In 1851, Manuel F. Cabral, a native of Ribeiros Pico, landed on Point Loma Island. The community continued to grow, and in 1897, 25 fishermen founded the Portuguese Union Fishing Company. In 1913, Joseph Azevedo set up their first tuna cannery in their home garden, and that later became the San Diego Packing Company. World War I increased orders for the canned sardines necessary to supply American troops in Europe. Manuel O. Medina was one of the pioneers. Medina's Pacific was the largest fishing boat in San Diego. On February 15, 1942, 2 months after Japanese military planes bombed the United States Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, the U.S. Navy requisitioned the tuna vessels for military service. Some 600 fishermen of Portuguese descent volunteered. A total of 47 tuna boats were mobilized. As of 1967, 16 of the tuna clippers that had been converted into wartime coastal patrols were still fishing. Today, not a single one remains active in San Diego. The Portuguese developed cutting-edge techniques and mastered the sea. Early fishing was courageously done by a simple hook and a line with live bait for chum. Pole fishing followed. In some cases, 3 or 4 poles were attached to catch very large tunas. For generations, navigation and seamanship qualities have been handed down from father to son. Today, Cristiano da Rosa is one of the last living legends of the tuna industry.
Quando eu cheguei aqui à América, eu tive que fugir para o mar depressa. A minha vida foi uma vida de trabalhos, e os trabalhos foi o mar e barcos de peixe.
He worked hard. It was a hard life. I remember being a child, and it was a dangerous life. He had gotten hurt out fishing, and he had gotten hit in the face with a hose. And I remember being on the dock and seeing the boat come into port with the ambulance waiting. And as a young girl, you don't understand that. I was little, and I was scared. But when the boat pulled up to the dock, there was my father behind the helm running the boat in, with his face all swollen. He went from docking the vessel to straight to the ambulance to the hospital. That's the type of person he was.
Quando eu voltava, queria ver os pequenos na doca.
He was worked in a time and was raised in a time where the men were made of steel and the boats were made of wood. And he was a strong person.
Tenho apanhado alguns a gente chama storms, sabe? E é daqueles que a gente não gosta, mas tinha que se apanhar. Tinha que sofrer até que ele passasse, para salvar com a vida. E tinha que ir perdido por mais abaixo, entrar noutros mares, carregar o barquinho e fugir para casa. Um homem não chora, enfrenta as coisas como elas são, mas
Não, eu vou chorar.
By the 20th century, a small group of Portuguese immigrants had settled in Point Loma in pursuit of a life on the sea. They built churches, halls, and museums to celebrate their island traditions in their own motherland. They were the first in San Diego, and today the Portuguese remain one of the most successful and respected ethnic groups.
And if you see where most of the Portuguese live here, most of them live in a section of Point Loma we call Tunaville or Roseville, but many of them live up on the hill overlooking the water, just like it was in Madeira or Pico, where most of them came from.
In 1781, 44 settlers, Los Pobladores, founded El Pueblo de la Nuestra Señora la Reina de Los Angeles. Not too far from the original 44 settlers, Jose Roca arrived in the region after deserting English schooner Columbian in 1814. At that time, LA was approximately 600 people. He was the first Portuguese settler in California. It is said his skills earned him protection from the missionaries. Roca built a house in the center of Pueblo, raised a herd of 600 in Rancho La Brea, married the daughter of the settlement's police chief, and died at just 47. The home he built later served as the Los Angeles City Hall. Eliseo Martins was one of many benefactors in making the Portuguese Hall what it is today. The Artesia DES was always the heart of the community. It was founded in 1927 and built in 1935 to promote the traditions of the Portuguese in Artesia. In 1974, the Artesia DES went through a massive reorganization due to the ideas of a growing number of immigrants that came primarily from Terceira, Azores, who wanted to become more active in the community and close to their families. The city of Artesia is recognized all over the world for its vibrant Portuguese community. Today, it is one of the most impressive and complete Portuguese community centers in America. More actors, dancers, and musicians living and working in Los Angeles than any other city at any time in the history of civilization. Many of these recognized faces are of Portuguese descent. Perhaps one of the most recognized Portuguese Americans in the world is actor Joaquim Almeida, known for his roles in hundreds of films and TV shows. He was one of the first Portuguese household names worldwide.
Eu vim para a Califórnia há 10 anos, quando vim fazer o 24 Horas, e aluguei uma casa aqui um apartamento aqui nas Torres, aqui em Santa Mónica, e olhei e disse, eu aqui conseguia viver. Eu nunca tinha gostado muito de Los Angeles, mas eu aqui de Los Angeles gostava de viver aqui na praia, pode-se andar a pé, parece mais uma vila, e estamos em Los Angeles, quer dizer, apesar de se chamar Sítio Santa Mónica. E agora, ao fim de 37 anos, é estranho, quando eu digo 37 anos, é muito tempo, é uma vida, não é? Para 37 anos é uma vida, estar entre Los Angeles e Nova Iorque, está-se bem, a Califórnia acho que está-se bem, sobretudo aqui na praia, temos um clima fantástico. É o sítio que se tem que estar quando se faz cinema, portanto vou continuando por aqui. Eu realmente, a minha carreira aqui começou a pegar. Eu fiz o primeiro filme com 24 anos, mas depois o segundo filme com 26 anos, o terceiro que eu falei tinha 28, e depois a partir daí ela começou a andar bem. Portanto, espero que no futuro próximo haja mais portugueses dentro do cinema. Não vem competir comigo, não tem a mesma idade que eu, portanto não é uma coisa que... E a mim só me dá prazer, gostava de ver mais portugueses a terem sucesso por cá.
A new recent wave of immigration brought to California accomplished professionals seeking to expand their careers outside of Portugal.
Lembro-me perfeitamente de estar no topo dos arranha-céus em downtown, na Baixa de Los Angeles, e de virem umas lágrimas aos olhos porque estava ali quase sozinha, porque estava ali a comandar uma equipa de 50, 60 pessoas, o Fernando Fragata estava a realizar.
One of Portugal's most successful filmmakers moved to the City of Angels following his dream. He produced the first film done by a Portuguese in Hollywood, Love and Alchemy, won several international awards for Best Short Film and Best Director, Sweet Nightmare, and the critical acclaimed action comedy Chasing Life. In 2004, he wrote and directed The Trunk, which became top-grossing Portuguese film of that year. Backlight, the first film produced by a Portuguese in Hollywood, broke box office records in Portugal.
Quando eu cheguei aqui, em 92, ainda era muito novo, ainda não tinha feito filme nenhum, mas tinha o sonho, obviamente, né? Mas foi difícil, bastante difícil a adaptação, porque inclusive era tudo bastante diferente. Eu conhecia pouco, não conhecia aqui ninguém, vim sozinho completamente, foi uma aventura. E quando cheguei, por exemplo, a Hollywood Boulevard, foi um choque, a Sunset Boulevard, porque aquilo não era o que é hoje, aquilo era um bocado assustador na altura, estamos a falar em 92. Hoje aquilo já está tudo bonitinho, tem lá o Kodak Theater, etc, as ruas muito mais limpas, mas na altura então foi um choque enorme, principalmente porque o que eu conhecia daquilo era o que eu via nos filmes, e os filmes pintam a coisa de uma maneira toda glamourosa, etc, e quando eu lá cheguei, mas isso não é nada que eu vi nos filmes.
Barbara Oliveira Pinto is from the new generation of Portuguese women living and working in Hollywood.
A nível do cinema, tive a oportunidade de entrevistar gente que adorava e que tinha crescido comigo aos domingos à tarde, ver aquelas máquinas todas em Portugal, não é? E de repente olho-me ao espelho e digo, quem diria eu estar agora cara a cara com estes protagonistas da nossa infância e da nossa juventude.
Los Angeles is home to many Academy Award-winning film music composers. A native of Madeira Island, won Breakout Composer of the year 2010 by the International Film Music Critics Association. He was nominated for a Gold Spirit Award in 2011 for Best Revelation Composer, Best Score for a Drama Film in 2011 at the International Film Music Critics Association, and Best Original Score for a Feature Film at the Hollywood Music and Media Awards.
Eu sempre tinha querido vir para cá, portanto havia uma ligação quase espiritual, talvez, não sei, porque eu nunca tinha estado aqui, mas eu lembro-me de estar a aterrar em Los Angeles e a passar por cima, ver-se a imensidão que Los Angeles é e senti-me mais ou menos, senti que estava a chegar a casa de alguma maneira, de um ponto de vista mais espiritual.
Vim para a Califórnia em 2002 para ser mestrina titular da orquestra Young Musicians Foundation Debut Orchestra, uma orquestra pré-profissional com jovens até aos 25 anos. Depois fui mestrina assistente da Orquestra de Câmara de Los Angeles e entre 2004 e 2008 fui mestrina assistente da Orquestra Filarmónica de Los Angeles.
The mystique and mythology of rock and roll made LA a music mecca. Among its legends, Portuguese-American Joe Perry, lead singer from Journey, Steve Perry, and Azorean award-winning singer and composer Linda Perry, to Sarah native Nuno Betancourt.
Look, by no means being Portuguese, you know, in every culture we have our good and our bad, you know, our good and our bad people, you know, and but as a culture itself, initially, where it comes from, I didn't recognize it when I was younger, but it took me to go away and around the world a bunch of times to come back home to go, wow, what a difference from what I saw and what I felt from different people in different cultures, how important it was at home, in a Portuguese home.
The Portuguese are pioneers in California's agribusiness, from sweet potatoes and dairies to bullfighting. Portuguese have been the backbone of California's small agricultural communities for over a century. The San Joaquin Valley is the state's top agricultural producing region, sometimes called the food basket of the world. San Joaquin Valley produces 12.8% of the United States agricultural production. There are more Azorean Portuguese in the San Joaquin Valley than in all 9 of the Azorean Islands. In 1888, the Portuguese introduced sweet potato cultivation to the valley. By 1923, about 85% of those involved with milk production in Merced and Stanislaus counties were of Portuguese origin. In 1939, some 100,000 immigrants from Portugal and their descendants were estimated to be living in California. 60% or more were engaged in agriculture, 75% working in the dairy industry.
A seguir de San Diego, eu penso que a comunidade per capita mais rica, de facto, é o de Vale São Joaquim. Porque há aqui, de facto, explorações agrícolas, não é? Que valem milhões e milhões. Temos muitos luso-americanos que estão neste negócio, que têm 3 mil, 5 mil, 12 mil, 18 mil vacas. Para além disso, são pessoas que têm terras e normalmente não têm 50 acres ou 25. São pessoas que, muitas delas, têm 5 mil, 6 mil, 7 mil acres de terra. Nem toda a gente, como eu já escrevi alguns, nem toda a gente vive à rica e à francesa a fumar charutos cubanos, não é?
Most dairies in the valley are owned by Portuguese from the islands of Terceira and São Jorge. Before the Carnation Revolution in 1974, many Portuguese came to this area to avoid the war in the African colonies. Life in the islands became close to impossible. Many, like Manuel Sosa, left. Overpopulation, economic crises, and periodic lack of outside involvement in the archipelago provoked immigration to every single place on the surface of the earth.
Quando arrebentou lá aquela 25 de Abril, ela até tinha 3 filhos, deixou lá, foi que todo dia mandava, mas sempre se mandou. E então minha mãe ainda teve aqui 14 anos, mais filhos todos juntos. Sempre fizemos aquela aventura, porque ela sofreu muito para acabar de criar a gente. Mas, seja por amor de Deus, até hoje nunca me arrependi então ter vindo para esta terra. Gosto muito das ilhas, vou lá quando posso, mas, seja por amor de Deus, estou satisfeito aqui. Fui lá ao cabo de 12 anos, parecia-me que podia trabalhar à mesma como quando estava lá, mas já fazia muita diferença. Disse, não, as ilhas para mim acabaram de viver cá quando puder, com respeito a trabalhar na América.
In San Joaquin Valley, 52.6% of dairies producing grade milk in 1972 were under the ownership or management of people of Portuguese descent. In the 1990s, California's Azorean Americans own roughly 365,000 head of dairy cattle with a combined value of $1.5 billion.
48% das vacarias na Califórnia são de luso-descendentes. E estamos a falar num negócio que cada ano gira 6,6 bilhões de dólares.
Somos 3 irmãos que desde o princípio começámos sempre o negócio junto e continuamos juntos. Temos como 7 mil cabeças e temos uma segunda leitaria que são 1000 cabeças das de Jorge.
Temos caminhões de leite, neste momento estamos a fazer, a cartar 42, 43 caminhões de leite diário para a fábrica de Romar e temos caminhões de cartar ervas do estado de Oregon e de Nevada e de Califórnia.
In the 1980s and 90s, several dairies moved from California to the state of Idaho. A small Portuguese community concentrated in the area of Twin Falls, Buell, and Wendell. The Betancourt dairies employ more than 300 employees milking more than 30,000 cows in 8 facilities, making it the largest single milk producer in the world.
Número 1 em quê? Número 1 é a mulher.
Começou em 82, com 17 vacas, depois foi comprando vacas e leitarias.
temos agora, já tive 60 mil vacas, agora tenho 40 mil vacas.
Starting in the 1970s, several Arias owners began raising bulls, fostering an intense activity in the field of tauromachi. Bullfighting traces its roots to historic bull worship and sacrifice in Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean region. Most Portuguese bullfights are held in two phases, the spectacle of the Cavaleiro and the Pega. In the Cavaleiro, a horseman on a Portuguese Lusitano horse, specially trained for the fighters, fights the bull from horseback. In the second stage, called the Pega, the Forcador, a group of 8 men challenge the bull directly without any protection or weapon of defense.
A gossip point when you're meeting new people and they ask you what you do for a living and you say that you raise fighting bulls and they're like, what? You know, under the California code, you may have a bullfight, a bloodless bullfight, if it's in injunction with a religious ceremony, que é como uma festa. And that's the only way that you can have a bullfight. But again, it's bloodless, so that means that you can't draw any blood and no cruelty.
One of the contributions of the Portuguese in the Atwater-Buhak area was the development of the sweet potato industry in California. Today, Manuel Eduardo Vieira, known as the Sweet Potato King, is one of the most decorated Portuguese Americans in the world. A native of Pico Island, he developed a small family business into a large enterprise.
Meu tio convidou-me para visitar a sua empresa e sugeriu que eu que a comprasse. Estou falando em julho de 77, há quase 36 anos. Nós cultivamos produto biológico 2.000 acres americanos, que são 8.000 acres portugueses. Tem épocas do ano que trabalhamos com 950 pessoas, mais de 50 mil toneladas, 50 milhões de quilos. 35% é produto biológico. Segundo a USDA, nós somos o maior produtor biológico do mundo em batata doce. E o nosso produto é vendido para todo o continente norte-americano, Canadá ao norte, Estados Unidos e México. Nós, graças a Deus, temos o domínio total.
The most important festa is without a doubt the Espírito Santo, Holy Ghost. More than 160 celebrations were held in approximately 130 different cities and small towns throughout the state. No other festival is so Portuguese or filled with more meaning in the life of the Azorean. The Festa's high point occurs on Sunday when a solemn procession departs from the Portuguese social hall for the Catholic Church, where Mass is said and the Queen is crowned. Afterwards, the parade forms up again and returns to the hall. Sopas do Espírito Santo, as Holy Ghost soup, is served free to all comers, Portuguese or not. These volunteer-based brotherhoods serve approximately 200,000 free meals every year, a number just slightly inferior to the total population of the Azores.
Apesar de ser uma das comunidades mais distantes geograficamente, fica aqui no lado do Pacífico, é uma comunidade que ainda vive muito a nossa identidade cultural. E isto é de louvar. Aliás, isto é uma homenagem que todos os açorianos devem dar a esta grande comunidade que é a comunidade da Califórnia.
The San Francisco Bay Area is home to one of the largest concentrations of Portuguese in America. Santa Cruz County and the Monterey Bay region are also home to many Portuguese that settled by the ocean. The Big Sur extends for miles in the California coastline, from Carmel to San Luis Obispo. Big Sur's isolation and natural beauty attracts many writers and artists. California's largest urban concentration of Portuguese is located in San Jose and Santa Clara. Little Portugal, the Portuguese commercial district, is a few blocks away from the Portuguese National Church of the Five Wounds, dedicated in 1914, where several Portuguese organizations built their halls. Today, it is still the center of the Portuguese community in the Bay Area. Nowadays, Portuguese immigrants and their descendants occupy a wide range of positions in California's industries.
Nós tínhamos trabalhos desde o sul da Califórnia ao estado de Nevada e ao arquipélago de Havaí. Fazíamos trabalhos muitíssimo grandes para o governo federal.
Os primeiros 9 anos nunca tirámos férias. Os primeiros 9 anos casados nunca tirámos férias. Tínhamos uma ambição, queríamos começar o nosso negócio e fomos para a frente.
Portuguese immigrants' achievements have been impressive. Driven by a fierce work ethic, upon entering into America, they took advantage of the opportunities that Portugal did not offer at the time.
Nós nunca tivemos medo de avançar, porque nós principiámos sem nada e se a gente perdesse tudo, também ficámos sem nada outra vez. Mas o sentido não era esse, o sentido era conquistar sempre mais e mais.
Silicon Valley is a nickname for the South Bay portion of the San Francisco Bay Area. The region occupies roughly the same area as the Santa Clara Valley. It is home to many of the world's largest technology corporations, as well as thousands of small startups. For nearly 2 centuries before the tech companies, this farming community produced a significant amount of fruits and vegetables until the 1960s.
Nós temos aqui em São Francisco, muito perto de São Francisco, Silicon Valley, e temos, portanto, aqui toda a parte de investimento em que as nossas empresas, algumas delas já estão aqui implantadas e bem implantadas, com sucesso.
Uma passada por Stanford passa pelo Google Building, o edifício Google, o edifício Yahoo, o edifício Hewlett Packard, só o Facebook.
My most gratifying position at IBM was the webmaster for the IBM Year 2000 Technical Support Center. That was a very interesting time because the year 2000 transition could have been disastrous on a global scale.
I'm a product of the dot-com boom, so I started my career back in the early 90s when the internet was just forming.
A lot of the best companies to work for that have been voted that and given that honor are right here in our backyard.
Na Califórnia é prazer ver que as pessoas, os portugueses, portanto não criaram guetos, não é? E que se misturam e que absorvem a cultura e que aprendem com isso. E por isso vingam tanto na vida, e acho que isso é muito importante.
Many Portuguese have moved from dairy farming and tuna fishing and are now fully integrated into the American economy without abandoning their Portuguese identity. John Mello, President and CEO of Amyris, and Angelo Garcia, President of George Lucas Real Estate Holdings, are just two examples. By the late 20th century, more immigrants and their descendants began ascending the high-tech corporate ladder, assuming well-paid positions of responsibility and prestige in management.
Vocês não sabem que o imigrante leva consigo a ilha, não às costas como um pesadelo, mas como pérola formada pela saudade na concha de coração.
The second I smell that air, I feel like I belong there. You know, and a lot of people from there might get upset, well, if you love this place so much, why don't you live here? Why don't you move here? And that's not really the case. The case is when you grow up where you grow up, that's where your work is, that's where your roots are now. But it doesn't mean that you can't go back and go like, wow, I feel like, you know, whether it's from the earth, you know, the earth there makes me feel like I'm from there. The smell of that earth makes me feel that I'm from there. And it makes me feel like, I'm at home. It's really bizarre. It's before I even get to the airport inside, I just feel like, wow, I'm home. You know, and you never forget that. I don't care how many years you live abroad, I don't care how many years you're away, you never lose that, ever.
E pronto, e viva as relações luso-americanas e um abraço a todos os luso-americanos.
E o mar antigo à nossa frente, em que o meu povo parte descontente e vive em terra estranha e fria. Canto a vida e a maresia, canto a vida e a maresia. Canto a vida e a maresia, em teu corpo solto e quente, minha lira é suave e fria, meu canto é triste e dolente. Canto a vida e a maresia, em teu corpo solto e quente. E há sempre um cais e uma baía, e o mar antigo à nossa frente, em que o meu povo parte descontente e vive em terra estranha e fria. Canto a vida e a maresia, canto a vida e a maresia.
Entardece, loiro de cinza doira, esta nossa decantada solidão. No cais, deitados sobre o ventre, os barcos repousam a sua melancolia. Recusam-se a singrar neste mar azul, onde há vêmitos de asas e remúrios de incensos, cujo aroma sabe bem ouvir. talvez para ti